Hello. I want to talk very briefly about what makes a good business research topic. Why? Because a lot of undergraduates and some postgraduates too have a little difficulty in trying to decide what kind of topic to research. This is usually because it comes towards the end of a course, particularly for undergraduates, when the rest of the course has been taught modules where you turn up for classes, you do the reading, you get assessed. So the whole thing is guided by the lecturers. But when it comes to the business research topic, it's a bit different. We suddenly have to work out our own topic, and we're calling the shots in the process. So first of all, what doesn't make a good business research topic? Well, something you can answer very quickly. So a bit of fact-finding research. For example, taking a particular company and saying, well, I want to know how sales of the different products have varied over the last 5 years. Now that's data that exists, the answer's already out there, all we've got to do is find it. So that's fact-finding. That's not really suitable. It might come in the early stages of a business project, but only contextually. So what's a real good business research topic? It's going to be one that hasn't got immediate answers to be found, one where we can develop our own research to construct the answers. Now, as always, if we're doing something for academic purposes, it rather helps to know how we're going to be assessed. Here's one example of how a business project might be assessed. Whether it's called a dissertation or a project, it'll probably have these sorts of headings in it. There'll need to be terms of reference or aims and objectives, something clear that you're trying to achieve. And the people who mark your project will have those in mind when you present the whole thing. Did you actually achieve them? Secondly, there'll be some sort of literature search and review. This is not just finding literature that relates to your aims and objectives, it's also critiquing it, making sure you interpret it correctly, making sure you've used it to then build on your research questions. So once you've got some research questions which have been suitably evidenced and grounded in the literature, then you work out your methodology, the kind of approach you will take to research. What kind of research design will you use? Will it be largely quantitative or qualitative? Will there be lots of respondents or just a few? How many people might be able to help you with the sort of research questions you have? And then you'll need to analyse the data that comes out of your research. You'll need to present it in a way which makes sense to the reader. And then, most importantly, you'll need to discuss the analysis of your findings together with the literature you found to start with, and come up with recommendations and conclusions. And you'll need to present it all in a particular format, and that will depend on your institution, your university or college. So that's what you're aiming at. So we need to find a topic that's suitable for all this work. It must have a clear purpose and expected outcomes. It must relate to academic literature, and preferably it's going to involve some field work that you can undertake. What else makes a good business research topic? Well, particularly one where you feel comfortable about the research. You've got to be not overly stressed. You don't want to take on too much, and very often that's what supervisors are telling students, that look, you're trying to bite off too much here. Let's be reasonable about what you can achieve in the time period you've got before you hand in your project. Make sure that most of the literature you come across is accessible in your language. Make sure it focuses on the skills you have, and make sure it's not going to suddenly cost you a lot of money. You can't start travelling to lots of other countries. Whether you can afford it or not is not really the point. This is not funded research, and you should be able to do it without any expense. But most of all, in my view, this has to be something that you are excited about, something that's going to retain your interest, something that motivates you over a significant period of time. One where access to data isn't too difficult. For example, If you want to find out what Sir Richard Branson is doing in his business enterprises, that might be a very laudable thing, but unless you happen to know him and have direct access to him, it's going to be quite hard to find out what he thinks. All you could use would be public domain data. So think about how you would get access to the kind of data you would need. We need a symmetry of potential outcomes. In other words, the things that you're looking for have to be of equal value. You really want a dissertation which doesn't have some easy bits and then a hard bit to do. You want to have them equally spread. And finally, it's really important, if you're going to put a lot of effort into this, that you choose something that might relate to your future career. It might be the methodology, or it might be the content, or the questions, or the context. Who knows? But something you think you want to become expert in, so that when you're sitting in a job interview, you can talk about it as an expert. How do you find a good research topic? Well, you can pluck them out of the air, and some students have them already in mind. But based on the Good Research Methods book called by Saunders, Lewis and Thornhill, latest edition is 2012, you could think about rational thinking to get your research topic, or creative or lateral thinking. So rational thinking, you can base it on your own strengths and weaknesses. You can look at previous projects in your institution. You can talk to people. You can search the literature. You can just follow up leads in the media. Or you can take a more creative or lateral thinking approach by just keeping a log of ideas over a short period of time, by exploring personal preferences in your curriculum. And maybe you can use relevance trees, for example, mind maps, to just sort of sketch out the ideas that you have. You could use brainstorming. You can do it by yourself, or you can do it with other people, which is usually more effective. You could use a Delphi technique, for example. They're all written up in the literature and easy to find out. Delphi technique pulls lots of people together and gradually gets them to think in one particular way. So there are many other ideas, other creative techniques like analogy, like manipulation of ideas. All sorts of ways you can use, but sooner or later you need to come up with that project. And we often talk about a funnel. The idea is that you begin by thinking about a big research area, and then you pull that down into something specifically researchable. You develop questions, you develop propositions, and you finally come up with your research proposal. So let's just put a few examples in there. Suppose you're keen on rugby and you rather like the marketing course you did. Okay, so that's your research area then. So we brainstorm a researchable topic that uses rugby and marketing. And that brainstorm leads us to something like, well, okay, how product placement on television could be used in marketing club-specific merchandise. If that sounds very specific to you, don't forget there was a brainstorm process between this bit and this bit. Then you need to develop some research questions. These aren't the kind of questions you'd ask in an interview. These are much broader. So you do this by looking at what's currently written, in particular about marketing and in specific about product placement and merchandising. If we can do it in relation to sports merchandising, so much the better, if we can find literature like that. We read the literature, we start to make notes, we start to think, well, actually, I've just found someone who's done exactly this on rugby, so I can't do that. Well, it might be that you can, but you do it in a different context, or you do it for a different club, or with different respondents, or you perhaps use their method and try it with other people. So don't just throw it away as an idea. Alternatively, your literature search might give you an even better idea. And here's a suggestion. We've refined this researchable topic into the researchable question, what factors affect successful product placement in the sports merchandise sector? Now it's sounding like a project title. Then we need some research propositions, and you can conclude that from your early reading, your initial literature review. So you might think, well, what factors come up in the literature? Timeliness, cost advantage, context, etc., etc. And things like maybe wanting to associate the brand of the club with particular characters in TV shows, looking at particular audience profiles. You then discuss with your tutor whether you're on the right lines. Well, of course you can discuss with your tutor all the way through this process, but what we're trying to end up with is a research proposal which has an initial literature review and can clearly show what kind of fieldwork, in this case some interviews and some market research with customers, which would help you answer this research question. So, we come down to a final title here, exploring the opportunities of product placement in retail merchandising. Now that topic is probably totally irrelevant to you, but hopefully I've shown you a particular way which is used by many supervisors to help students start with a big, broad research area and gradually narrow it down to get to that good research topic.